of a familiar eyeball shape. You could remove a little bit more of this, but like our models, it's fairly round. Eyeballs for the most part are usually round-ish. But this eyeball, you can tell, kind of where it came from. So, general shape, don't be deceived. The sclera is referring to the white of the eye, and so it's kind of white, kind of not. If this one's a little more like grayish brown almost, but it's the white of the eye, it's the outside layer of the eye. So in the cow, it doesn't look super, super white. That's mostly due to sitting in a bucket of chemicals, being dead, stuff deteriorates, it turns colors, etc. So like on the model, it would be this outer white layer, the whites of our eyes, etc. So that's the sclera. So the choroid is the second layer, so underneath the cornea, underneath the sclera is the choroid layer. And so in these cow eyeballs, it's this darker layer. Trying to pin it. That's not a very good thing, so I'll just hold it. But it's not the colorful stuff. We're going to talk about that in a second. But the darker inner layer right here, and the second layer is the choroid. And also note that the choroid, as if you drive a black car or a truck or whatever, dark has a tendency to absorb heat. So like in absorbing heat, this choroid layer of the eye actually absorbs light. And so that's important for our eyeballs. We want to absorb that light. Yeah, cool. So that's the choroid. And then the innermost layer, which is very, very thin, super delicate, is called the retina. And the retina, you can kind of see it on this one a little bit better. It's been peeled off a little bit, but you can see that it would lie flat over the choroid. It's just as these eyeballs get dissected and bumped around, jumbled in a bunch of chemicals, the retina often detaches. You may know someone who's had a retinal detachment. It's a scary, scary thing because the retina actually contains the photoreceptors. So you need to know that the retina contains these photoreceptors. Photoreceptor is like a specific term for like your sight cells, the cells that are responsible for absorbing the light that you see and relaying that message to your brain so you can make sense of what you're seeing. And so photoreceptors, you don't need to know the two kinds. I may put it as an extra credit or a bonus question. If you've ever heard of rods and cones. Rods and cones are specific types of photoreceptors, and cones are responsible for seeing color. So cones, colors, and rods are the photoreceptors that I think are more for like grayscale, I think. But cones, like rods and cone, like a traffic cone, or a pine cone.
C-O-N-S.
Yeah, C-O-N-E-S.
Yes, cones.
Yeah,
cones.
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 Yeah, so know that the retina is a layer, super thin, that contains the photoreceptors, and it's the most inner layer of the eyeball. So moving on to the cornea. The cornea refers to this kind of clear, and it's not clear anymore, but this kind of clear, modified portion of the sclera. So white part of the eye all of a sudden turns clear or transparent. In this model, well, this one doesn't have a cornea, but if we didn't have that white part of our eye, our specialized cornea part of our eye, then no light could enter. So it kind of makes sense that it's clear, it's transparent, and it's at the front of our eye because it allows light to actually enter into our eyes. So this is the cornea. So then ciliary body. Ciliary body is referring to this kind of on the front half of the eyeball. If you look in here, It kind of looks like the bottom of a mushroom. It's real ridged. It's a kind of a modified layer, a modified version of the choroid. It's kind of similar in color. It's real dark. But this kind of ridged portion that's at the front of the eye is called the ciliary body. And know that the ciliary body contains the muscles that control the lens shape. And so the lens, if this were still intact, once again, so this skittle looking thing is the lens. It's not transparent anymore because of the chemicals, because the cow's dead. But if it were to still be held in place, you know, it would be right there, nestled by that ciliary body, so those muscles can control your lens shape to focus on far or near things. And so another thing to know is that on the ciliary body, the individual little kind of lines going down are called suspensory ligaments. And so kind of the ciliary body's suspensory ligaments are in the similar place, so I'll definitely specify if I pin that area which one I'm looking for. And the suspensory ligaments are just what hold the lens in place. So ciliary body are the muscles that control the lens shape. Suspensory ligaments are what holds the lens in place. So there's some distinctions there, and I'll probably use that as a hint if I do, you know, pin that area and what I'm looking for. The iris is the colorful part of the eye. You know, browns, blues, greens, grays, etc. We don't have, it's harder to see the iris on this cow eye. If I cut the cornea, then you may be able to see it right underneath. It's easier seen in a model. So, like right here, this colorful part, you know, what we're familiar with eyes, that's the iris. And so right in the middle of the iris, so the opening, to be exact, refers to the pupil. So the pupil isn't actually a like true physical structure. It's actually an opening. And this opening can be either, you know, if you walk into a dark room, we need more light, and so the pupil, you know, your pupil gets bigger. You walk into a super bright light outside, your pupils get real small because you have tons of light and you don't want that much in your eye. It's like sensory overload. So the pupil is the opening that's in the middle of the iris. Yep. And so moving on to optic nerve. Optic nerve is tricky to see on the actual cow eyeball. I mean, if you look real close here, you can kind of see this nub sticking somewhat off the back of the cow eyeball. I won't label it on this cow eyeball because I think it's a little tough. I will, though, possibly label it on this model. As you can see, there's this nub coming off the back. That's the optic nerve. And that's what's actually, you know, when all these photoreceptors are receiving information from the light that goes in the eye, that information goes through the optic nerve and into the brain to be processed. So, the fovea centralis is another feature that I cannot pin on the cow eyeball because it's just way too tricky. And the fovea centralis is referring to the place on the retina where the most photoreceptors are accumulated. So it's also, you could call it the place where you have the best vision. Your vision is the clearest and the crispest. Crispest, is that a word? And so in this model, the yellow spot is actually yellow. It's like a small spot that's like slightly lower or slightly off center from the optic nerve that's coming out the back. So that's the yellow spot. It's referring to the fovea centralis, the highest accumulation of photoreceptors on the retina. So yeah, definitely something I can't pin in the cow eyeball because it's tricky to see. So kind of opposite of the fovea centralis, we have what's known as the optic disc, and it's this white portion here that's kind of in the middle. The optic disc, as you can see, is actually where the optic nerve enters the eye. And so the optic disc, since that's where this optic nerve enters the eye, there's actually no photoreceptors there. So completely opposite of fovea centralis, which has the highest accumulation of photoreceptors. The optic disc has no photoreceptors. So it's also known as your blind spot. And we're going to do a little demonstration later to demonstrate that we all have blind spots. But yeah, that's right there. And it's hard to pin in the cow eyeball, so I'll pin it on the model. So aqueous humor, vitreous humor. So if you cut open into this eyeball, you see that there's some liquid here that kind of resembles water that ran out of the eyeball as soon as you cut it open. This really, really watery, liquidy substance is called the aqueous humor. As opposed to, you can see kind of right here, kind of sitting in this eyeball right here is kind of a more jelly-like substance. That's called the vitreous humor. So aqueous humor is the more liquid, like water-like fluid. And that fluid is found in the front part of your eye, so kind of in between, I think, the cornea and the lens. Whereas the vitreous humor, this more jelly-like substance, is found kind of in the big main portion of your eyeball, kind of the lens along the retina, kind of that area. So know the difference between the two different humors, the two different substances. Because I technically could pin like the vitreous humor. You know, I probably would give the buzzword jelly, like name this jelly-like substance. That'd be the vitreous humor. Another thing to note, so it's not officially on our list, but I often ask it as a bonus question. So this really pretty, almost, it looks kind of like a shell, it's blue and green, really iridescent. That's called the tapetum lucidum. If you want to know how to spell it, it's on the board. The tapetum lucidum is actually really cool. It's only found in animals that are out at night and they need to move around at night. So if you looked at a cat, a deer, you know, a raccoon, and you see eye shine, it's actually this tapetum lucidum that's reflecting back at you. We as humans, we're not evolved to really handle moving around at night on our own very well, so we actually don't have a tapetum lucidum. So if you shine a light at your friend, their eyes don't glow back at you, unless something's crazy. The tapetum lucidum. And so why this additional layer is there is, if you think about if they're moving around at night, they actually want as much light to come into their eye, but they also need to kind of emphasize this light. So that tapetum lucidum actually bounces the light a little more in their eyeball so they can gain more from their dark surroundings. It's pretty cool modification for nighttime animals. Cats especially, theirs is like, whoa. So last one on this little list is the lacrimal gland. Lacrimal gland, it would be virtually impossible to pin on this eye because there's on the cow eye because it's crazy cray. But on one of those models, I think it might be the one behind Marisol. I don't know if it's, see that thing that looks kind of like a tumor sticking off the top? That's referring to the lacrimal gland. And does anybody remember lacrimal moan? Yeah, it's tears. It's involved with producing tears. So if I, were to pin the lacrimal gland or put a sticker on the lacrimal gland, I'd have to use that model. I think that's the only one with a little tumor sticking off the top. So, cool. Any questions about those?